Today's guest is Steve Winward. He's the Managing Director for Business Applications at Microsoft, and he has a history in software development and consulting within the federal space that I'm very interested in. So thank you so much for joining me today, Steve.
And thank you. Thank you for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
So for those who haven't met you or interact with you, talk a bit about your background, where you're from, who you are, what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Steve Winward. I am the Managing Director for Business Applications for our Microsoft Federal practice. So what that means is Power Platform and Dynamics 365 as products that we are responsible for. My background, I actually grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. Went to college at JMU, James Madison in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I studied math and computer science. And when I went to school, I knew that I liked math. I didn't like to read. I didn't like English. I didn't like history. Math was just something I always gravitated towards. But what I found out in college is the things that I really gravitated towards were the math classes that let me program. And so I kept kind of falling back to, I really like this programming, but I felt like I was a math major. That's what I wanted to do. Got an internship out of college with Northrop Grumman. I then, out of college, got a really unique opportunity to join a startup company. I was employee 23 for a company called FlexPoint, founded by former Microsoft alumni. So in some ways, looking back, right, that was like a jumpstart to me getting into the entire Microsoft ecosystem, right, through that experience. And so I worked with them for 2 years. It was an amazing company with great people. I started at employee 23. 2 years later, when I left, I think they had around 60 people. So they grew the business a good amount in 2 years. But I then ultimately took a job as a consultant to Microsoft Consulting Services. And so when I started with the startup company, I knew I liked to program, and that's what they hired me to do. But what was really unique about the startup company was that they let me do a lot of different things where I wasn't prescribed to a very narrow job description. And what I mean by that is when I joined, it was because I wanted to do programming. But what I learned from that company was more around delivery and demo and presentation skills, right? How do you actually demo something that you're building to customers? And that, looking back, was probably one of the best experiences that I could get, which was a cool experience there. I switched over to Microsoft in 2010, so it was about 12 years ago, joined Microsoft Consulting Services as a consultant. One of the first things that you do when you join Microsoft Consulting Services, at least back then, I don't think they still do this now, but they had something called MSSU, Microsoft Services University. And that's really anybody in the world starting in consulting services would go to Redmond for 2 weeks and get a deep dive boot camp on all things. So you had executive coaches, delivering training. You had people doing public speaking and very specific kind of consulting training that you'd get in that time. I was 23 when I joined, and I was immediately blown away by, the scale of the company, how many people from all over the world were there. And I was intimidated and scared and anxious. And I realized that while I felt like, yes, I had done some good things, up for the first 2 years, I was feeling very kind of, worried that I was like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And so it took me quite a while to kind of find my ground and find my place at Microsoft. And now I am very fortunate looking back on that experience because it jump-started for me something to start working on public speaking. So I was at the startup and I got a little bit of that experience. I went to this boot camp at Microsoft and was just totally shocked. I was like, this is something I really need to focus on. And then I was very intentional for the next several years that anywhere I could find a meetup group or a community that would let me speak for the first time, I did that. And it was uncomfortable. It was hard, and over time it got better. And I would say that even today, it's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was a while ago. And I just wanted to share that story because what I think is interesting about that is that when I started in college, right, I was a computer science and math major. And what I wanted to do was very technical. I didn't even think that there was a career path outside of just programming. That's what I did for the first part of my career, right? And that got me to a lot of different places. And what I've been doing over the last 4 years now is on the sales side of product. So for the last 4 years, I've been aligned to products, which are Power Platform, Power BI, and Dynamics. But when I was in college, I would have never have pictured in a million years that I would actually be in sales for a tech company. But it's kind of the progression that happened. And one thing that I would just share for anybody that's watching, right? If you're thinking about, when I'm in college, how do I get to the next step, or where I'm at my role now and how do I get there? I would also maybe just say, think about what is it that fulfills you, right? And some of these things, it takes a little time to learn. But for me, one of the things that fulfilled me was really presenting, even if it made me scared, like at the end of it, right? Seeing that I was able to communicate to a customer, or taking something that was complicated and putting something into a PowerPoint slide. I also joke, I really feel like if I didn't have PowerPoint, I probably wouldn't be able to do my job. Like that is to me how I always do my diagrams. I've tried other complicated things, but PowerPoint always seems to be the thing that I fall back to. But distilling complicated things into a simple illustration to communicate that to people is something that I think is also really important. So sorry, I took a little bit of a tangent there, but I just wanted to kind of share that experience, because on paper, if you're looking at kind of this, it may seem a little bit different, but if you kind of understand that story, that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
That's very interesting. So when you were, I'm going to roll back the clock a little bit.
Mhm.
When you were looking at colleges, so did you know you were interested in math and computer science at that point?
Yeah, and it was, to be honest, it was kind of by process of elimination. So in high school, the subjects that I did well at were math and physics and science. The subjects I did horrible at were English and history. Now, also looking back at that, I think some of it was from an attention perspective, right? I was having a harder time staying focused with history and English and reading. But it also led me to what my career path was. And I think the thing that I really always liked about math and computer science was that it felt like when you solved a problem, you could be pretty precise and pretty exact, right? That you knew that you solved it, which is different from, like a history class or an English class where you can have an argument or a debate about something. But I would argue you can't say you're 100% on something like that, right? And that's just who I am, right? Like that's kind of me. And the other part of it is I like to build. So the other thing that I loved in middle school was my woodworking class that I did in seventh grade. I built, I think, every single project you could as a seventh grader in that woodworking class, but it's the building, right? Like to me, it was the craft. And it's the same thing with programming. There's a craft in how you build. And with math, it felt like there was a craft in terms of how do you set a proof to prove out, right, this kind of problem set that you're solving for. And so that is kind of what led me to math. So when I went to college, I really just looked at programs where I felt like it was, first, the school was interesting, right? And JMU, by the way, is not typically like a hardcore kind of science place. But once again, I got lucky because the math program in particular was fairly small. And so I had classes where I was one of 4 students in some of these math classes. And so looking back, once again, it was amazing because I got such a cool kind of perspective with the professors there. And same thing on the computer science side, it was a little bit of a smaller program at the time, but it gave me an ability to mentor with some really amazing faculty there.
Wow, that is really interesting. Now, how did you find your internship? Was there job boards or job fairs?
It was through the job fair through James Madison. So they did a great job with that. So basically what happened, it was JMU alumni from Northrop Grumman that came back to interview. They wanted JMU people specifically. So in that case, I got pretty fortunate there. And that's how I got my first internship.
And you learned about the startup through interactions, just randomly?
Oddly enough, so I got the internship at Northrop Grumman. I met a few people through there, and one of them, while I was a senior, had shared with me that they're like, "Hey, I met somebody at a gym that is starting a startup company. I thought of you. Here's the contact information, right?" And so I met with the owners, and they basically kind of gave me a job like at the end of that, which was kind of crazy. But yeah, so it was kind of through just the internship and through networking there.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating because there are lots of ways, right? We fall into jobs, and many people think it's a huge grind. You got to go apply to every possible place you can find, figure out how to structure your cover letter for every opportunity. But I think you illustrate a really important point, and sometimes it's just you've networked with enough people that when an opportunity comes up, that somebody says, "Hey, this reminds me of Steve in this case. Let me mention it to him." And I have found many jobs that way. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll share to that too is, so when I was in college, one of the things I did too is, so I had my classes, but then I also had professors that let me kind of just do kind of like research projects.
Hmm.
And so there was one research project I did in particular. I was a junior, I believe. And I just built my own computer vision recognition with a Java application. So there was a published paper. I implemented the algorithm in a Java application. But what was really cool about that is when I did my internship interview, and then also when I interviewed for the startup company, I had a real tangible thing that I could talk to them about, right? It may not have been production scale and production ready, and it couldn't, obviously do what today's modern AI ML services can do, but it was a real thing. And when I get back to kind of that builder mindset, like that was pretty cool. And it was a real tangible thing that I could show to people. Fast forward to now, I wish that something like GitHub was around, because
Right.
GitHub is this incredible open source community that you can build and put stuff out there in the world and collaborate with other people that are doing things. And I'm super passionate about GitHub today. My team, we put things out in the open for our federal customer base around business applications. I also do things personally on GitHub too. So there was one example where I was on a nonprofit project where I still code, but I don't, code 40 hours a week. But I was helping out a nonprofit organization where they needed to interface with a Google Sheet.
Hmm.
Now, I'm a super C# nerd, so that's what I write, but I couldn't find at the time a really easy library to talk to Google Sheets. Now, Google, they have their own API, but I was struggling a little bit with that, so I wrote a wrapper on top of that in C#. I put that on GitHub. I made that available on NuGet so other people could pull that down. And I've had 3 or 4 people actually contribute to that since I did that. So I think like 7,000 people have downloaded it. Multiple people have contributed to it. Some people have had issues. They're like, hey, I don't know how this works. But in a time where if you're trying to find your first job and you're wondering where to start, I really think something like GitHub is really amazing, because you don't need a job today to do that. You can put things out there in the world. And if you don't want to start with a project, find an existing one. Search for something that you're passionate about. If you really are into fitness, there's really cool open source fitness projects that you could start with. And maybe it's only documentation that you're helping with at first, right? It doesn't have to be like crazy, but then start to know that community, figure out what would be something of value and start doing that.
Hmm.
And then when you meet with an employer, if you're, showing like you have real world things that you can kind of speak to. And I think that is a total game changer, right? If you're coming out of college and you have one person that's done real world things on GitHub today, you have another person that just from an academic ivory tower perspective has done coursework. Who do you think they're going to pick, right? It's probably going to be the person that's already done stuff on GitHub or something like that they can say, not only did I learn what I did in school, but these people in the real world are using what I've done. I think that is a total game changer.
I would agree. That's fascinating. And that's a great idea, right? And I agree with you. The technology and community interaction that exists today is far beyond the Usenet and the other ways we would communicate in the past. So that's a great suggestion for those looking to bolster their opportunies.
And I have one other story from growing up too, if we have the time, if you're
absolutely.
So one other story I'll just share too is that when I was in high school, so that was around the time that eBay was pretty popular. And so what I would do is I would actually go to yard sales, buy stuff. Sometimes at the end of the day, I would go towards the end of the day. And these people at that time were just like, I just want to get rid of it. Just take it. I would turn around and sell that on eBay. And then I started actually commissioning people, right? So I would say, hey, I'll sell your stuff if I can take like a 30% commission on this. And so I started doing that. And I did that for about 2 years. I had little business cards and I called it Trash to Cash. In fact, I think I still have it in my office here. Hold on, see if I can find it. Hold on. So this is the card. So this was from like 2003. That should come into focus there in a second. Let's see if that focuses. Maybe not.
No.
Oh man. Okay. Anyways, take my word for it. But that was the business card, 2003. And so, once again, being a builder and creator, it was cool. I had amazing parents that were super supportive, but that was probably my first kind of entrepreneurial kind of thing, coming out of high school, actually, was doing that.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So when you transitioned into sales, because that's a lot of people say it could be, maybe it's sales, maybe it's something else, right? But you went from technical to something non-technical.
Mm-hmm.
What was that decision process for you in terms of, do I really do this?
Yeah, and it was hard. And I'll be totally honest, right? I think there's a lot of stigma around sales. I think that in some cases, a lot of people think about sales as kind of that classic used car salesman. And for me in college, I was very technical, right? Math, computer science, and really never thought that that would be something I would be into. But after doing consulting for about 10 years, I think kind of one of the things I realized was for me, what I was selling was myself. I wasn't selling a product. I wasn't selling a packaged offering. It was me and my time. Every single day I would show up to a customer. That's what I had to prove my value, right? Because that is ultimately the business model there. And the other thing that I realized was that I really like being part of a product, a product that I'm passionate about, product that I believe in, and sharing that with people. And it took a little bit of time for me to kind of figure that out. Now, in parallel, I mentioned my public speaking thing. That was something that was super important to me, and I didn't really know why. But I do think that fast forward, communication skills is super important in sales. And so while I wasn't like in the moment thinking about, yes, like what I want to do ultimately is sales, I think that I kind of listened to what I thought I wanted to do, right? And it ultimately kind of led me to where I wanted to go. Um, and what I also think is that like people don't realize, like on the sales side of the house, like I lead a technical team of people. Everybody on my team, we build proof of concepts and demos. We make it real for customers to show them what would it be like to use our solutions. Right. Which is once again different from if you think about that stigma, what do people think sales is? And so I look at it from the lens of, we're here to help. We're here to show people what it would be like to use our product. Um, and we are as absolutely as technical as we need to be. However, we also have the ability to communicate and to speak and to present and to show things in a way, right, that we want to put a really cool story around that. And that's something to me that keeps it exciting, right? Because every week is a little bit different. Who are we going to meet with, right? Kind of what's the audience? What is the thing that we're trying to do? As a consultant, it was different. Like I would be with the same customer for maybe a year or 2 years. On the sales side, it's totally like flipped upside down. I'm with a customer for a few days or a week, right? I don't get the luxury to have like long-term engagements with people. So it mixes things up a little bit. And everybody's different, but for me, I've really kind of appreciated that side of it. And I've appreciated, being a Microsoft, being a part of a product, right? And being a part of like things that we are building, getting feedback back to the product group that can help our customers and that can help us kind of drive more product as well. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, it does. That's very interesting. I mean, I to myself was technical. I was a software engineer and then moved into management. And then into a variety of different roles, enterprise architecture and whatnot. So I think it's always that crux, right? At what point in my career, sometimes people never, and sometimes they do, they shift into a non-technical role, but that still provides a ton of value. I don't think people realize how many different roles there are across the IT spectrum. There's so many possible things people could do.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to touch back on the sales thing for me, I come back to, I truly believe in our product. I truly believe in what we're doing, right? And so to me, the sales part of that kind of comes natural, right? If I were in a position where I was covering a product that I maybe don't believe in, I think it would be a little bit harder. And so anyways, I just want to just double down on that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as you've gone through your career, you've been a few places, what's something you've seen or noticed that if we had come to you and said, Steve, you have the power to make a change in our career field, if you will, what's something you've witnessed that you wish we just did differently?
That's a great question. And I think I have kind of two parts to this. The first one to me would just be from a career progression perspective. I think that a lot of people, human nature, we want to feel like there's just this natural linear path to growth. And what I mean by that is that, like with the role that you're in and the title that you're in, you kind of just grow every year. Maybe you get a raise or a promotion or to the next title. But I think that the more important thing is to think about what are the kind of the skill sets that you want to build on, right? What are the things that you really want to be strong with? And then try to figure out, well, where does that take you from a title perspective or from a career perspective? So I think just the way that people navigate their career, I think could be a little bit differently, right? So if you're coming out of college, I think you can think about it one way, but I would really recommend to people just to listen to what are the things you find fulfilling And also, what do you think are some things that maybe differentiate you from others, and try to build a role around that versus trying to fit yourself into maybe like what a job rec would be or what a job description might be.
Hmm. That's
Um,
good. Yeah, that's good advice. Because a lot of people, you're right, they come out of college or they're in their career for a while and they just think it's all about the next step, right?
yeah.
Some of that's financial driven, right?
Yep.
We all do want and hope we have better success in finances, but also you need to meaningfully consider what does that mean in terms of what you're going to actually be doing. Otherwise, you're going to hate it.
Yeah. And so like to that end, I think it's okay to have lateral moves, right? But being strategic about it. Well, you know what, this is a lateral, but this is going to give me the ability to do way more public speaking than I would have ever done before.
Hmm.
So
That's
to
pretty
kind
good.
of think about it that way. And then on the second part of that, I do think, just from a career and networking perspective, people not being afraid to ask for mentorship and to ask for help, right? I mean, in this day and age, you can connect to pretty much anybody on the planet, but take people up on that, right? I mean, sure, people will say no, but I bet a lot of people will be flattered if you reached out and said, hey, you know what? I'm really thinking about moving into this career path or this industry. I would love to get your thoughts on this. As somebody who is an expert in this, what do you think? And I'd be willing to bet that you'd get a lot more yeses than you would think.
I would agree.
And so I wish that people felt more courage in those scenarios.
Oh, that's such a great. I'm not leaving it there, but that's just a great one to sink in. Right. I wish you're right. I wish people
Like
would.
like I myself wished when I was 21, I would have had the courage to do that. And you kind of feel like there's this natural hierarchy to not. What's the worst that can happen? They say no.
Right.
That's it. Right?
Yeah. They say no, and then they don't really think about it again. It's not like they're going to hold it against you somewhere down the line.
Yeah. And I wish people could change that. And you think about, the natural career path to technology and maybe the not so natural career path to technology. I think that that could be a way to help more people get into the technology field.
Hmm. So what's next for you, Steve? What's coming up, either in the products that you're managing or the space you're in? What's coming up here in the near future?
Yeah, so I mean, so with my team, it's all about Microsoft Federal, all of our federal customers for Power Platform and Dynamics 365. We are continuing to try to get that out to as many customers as we can. We have had a lot of positive momentum. We recently had so CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, they recently released a baseline security draft for Power Platform, which is really exciting because now the federal government is acknowledging Power Platform as a secure low-code platform. But other agencies have also blessed that too. So that's super exciting. We want to keep pushing forward on our kind of security and governance story with Power Platform Dynamics. We want to also work to show even tighter integration with Power Platform and Azure. So Azure is our developer services. And so we want to show more cool capabilities on that front as well. Obviously, we're still kind of in this kind of weird pandemic, but things seem to be opening up a little bit. We are planning to hopefully do some more in-person activities. So we just had a week-long event last week in person. Steven Siciliano, who's the VP of Power Automate, was in town. So that was really fun. We just opened up a new Arlington office. So in Arlington, Virginia, that is now our Microsoft Technology Center. Used to be in Reston. So that's a great space. If you haven't checked that out, definitely recommend it. And so looking forward to trying to do a little bit more in person now as things feel like they're starting to kind of level out here.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing you in person since I am in the DC area. And
Awesome.
thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity.